it's like, it's funny because I have this contradictory reputation. On the one hand, for being this kind of acerbic, troublemaking, fire-starting, invective brandishing bully, tough guy, whatever, right?
Right.
And on the other hand, being this callow sap for celebrities. Well, it's like both are wrong. and because nobody's that simple.
In addition to his obvious tremendous across-the-board success in the last several years, Springsteen has always been a critical success almost from day one. A colleague of yours, John Landau, who eventually went to work producing records for Springsteen and is now closely associated with him, wrote the famous words, "I have seen the future of rock and roll," and it's Bruce Springsteen when he first saw him performing in some little club someplace. And that kind of critical acclaim has followed Springsteen almost without exception until a cover story in Esquire several months ago by John Lombardi that just ripped the guy to shreds. And part of the premise was that Springsteen's popularity was largely a creation of rock critics like yourself and Landau and Robert Christgau and others. And I haven't heard you respond in any way, although you probably have somewhere else. But what is your...
No, I haven't. Nobody asked, for one thing, which shows you. I have two responses, one of which is about this, I have seen the future of rock and roll, which happened to be a column that I edited. Well, he was right. He was, that's one. And two is, what the article in Esquire really says is Bruce Springsteen isn't hip. Well, since when do I need Esquire to tell me what's hip? I mean, the one thing I know about being hip is that people who ask questions like that aren't.
The premise was that he's become such an icon that people who have no rock and roll sensibility now populate his concerts. Maybe not exclusively, but largely. People who don't know anything about the history of the music, who have no attitude themselves, mall girls showing up because Bruce is cute, and they might relate to Bruce the same way they'd relate to Michael J. Fox.
You know John Fogerty's song, Rock and Roll Girls? Those are credentials. Being a mall girl, that's a credential. Coming to a show because somebody's cute and walking away with something more than you thought. That's the best credential. That's a far better credential than a press pass from Esquire magazine. Or, for that matter, from Rolling Stone magazine or Rock and Roll Confidential or any other publication you want. It's their music. It's not some guy with pencils music. It's that kid in the mall. That's whose music it is.
You were saying, as we resume with Dave Marsh, you were about to say, Dave.
Well, I decided I was going to champion Madonna. First of all, I like her records. Second of all, I like her brass. Third of all, she's from Pontiac, too. She says, I have a tale to tell. Sometimes it's hard to hide it well. And to me, one of the reasons I want to play this record on your show is because one of the things that you do in your books to me, and one of the things I try to do with these little records, using them is kind of the way you use people, is draw out of people what they're trying to hide, the secret story that they thought they were ashamed of. And in some ways, I guess for me, to be able to, at 40, say, I grew up in a racist household. I grew up in a house where I wondered if my dad was in the Ku Klux Klan. I grew up in a place where people would kill you if you were black and try to go to school with white people. This is insane. And yet, it was very difficult for a long time to talk about the fact that this was my life. You should move out into liberal society. You don't want to admit that you grew up in that kind of barbarism. And at the same time, the same thing about whether it's about drug abuse or beatings, the whole wide range of things. And to me, one of the things that music is for is to kind of heal the human heart. And Madonna, in a very peculiar and sometimes offensive and obnoxious way, has done some of that. And so this is my favorite Madonna.
Let's hear that, and then some thoughts following that with Dave Marsh.
In Marsh's new book, The Heart of Rock and Soul, he's rated what he considers the 1,001 greatest singles ever made. I asked him why.
It seemed to me that the story of rock and roll had been told from this very narrow and actually inaccurate point of view that turned it into an Anglophile white boys club. And I thought, well, That's not what I listen to in the middle of the night when I'm really got my heart and soul on the line. Here, what I listen to is the music of black people, and it's got a lot of women involved in it and a lot of groups. And it came from various parts of the United States. And it's just people who have been obliterated by the way that history has been told. And so I thought, I'll get to write about the records I love, and I'll get to try to set some version of the record on paper that hasn't been told yet. And here we are today.
What do you mean when you say that the version of rock and roll that's always told comes out like an Anglophile white boys club?
Well, I mean simply that David Bowie's, James Brown's knockoffs are given more importance than James Brown's original creations. I mean that it's taken for granted when people write about albums that something that professes seriousness is serious and something that professes triviality is trivial. Whereas for me, I might see something like the Madonna, like the Shangri-Las or Madonna, as being more serious than some relatively pompous postmodern dance band.
Mm-hmm. And why are you going with singles and not albums?
Because that's where that music gets made, because it is dance music and love songs and things that look trivial. If you look at albums, you do get a different perspective on history. You're never going to get Aretha Franklin or Marvin Gaye or even Chuck Berry right by trying to look at their history on LPs. They made that music song by song, record by record, and we experienced it and share it song by song, record by record. I guess that's another part of the singles mentality, is that it's the experience we share, because those often as not are the hits, or even many times the obscurities that people have in common.
For the sake of argument, might he have a point? And by my asking this question doesn't mean obviously that I agree with him, but I'd like to see your response. Might he have a point that when a guy becomes as big as Springsteen became, especially after Born in the USA, he was big before that, but after that it went, the stadium tours and everything, and back on the cover of every magazine you can think of. When a guy becomes that big, when he becomes fodder for People magazine, in addition to Rolling Stone, whether he intended it that way or not, can't some of the artistic edge come off?
Well, I mean, I think that the challenge is right there. And I think that rather than look at that as a fait accompli, as just something that is irreversible, the interesting question is, what can you do about it?
It's Bruce Springsteen singing Dancing in the Dark. There's a great line that I don't think we got to yet, that I want to change my clothes, my hair, my face.
Well, one of the things I love about that line is that it harks back to how you felt when you were 16. When you're 16...
You don't give up feeling that way when you get older.
Well, exactly. But I mean, when that is the definition of how you feel when you're an adolescent. And at the same time, I bet you, Bruce is 37 now, so am I. And I bet you there are a lot of people in all the ages in between listening to the show who know exactly what we mean. I mean, I got up this morning and I'm on a book tour, so I'm groggy and I didn't even shave. And, my turn when I get back to the hotel, it won't work, but you got to keep trying. But what you can change is maybe you can help change the face of the world.
I have to tell you, I felt betrayed by his rock video of that song, which was directed by Brian De Palma.
A lot of us
because he's for our listeners who haven't seen it, he's singing the song about frustration, looking really happy and healthy and smiling, and he dances with an actress who's planted in the audience.
Don't blame Brian De Palma. Some pains in the book about this, because I like Brian. I think he's talented, even though he cuts his own throat a lot. This was not his fault. The thing is that Bruce wrote this song out of a feeling of terrible isolation, and what you hear when you hear that record is the joy of the music followed by its negation in the lyrics and the vocal of just anguish. And what he did when he sang it in the video was he smiled all the way through, and he had just had his teeth fixed. So the smile looked like ultra bright. And that was the mistake, was that he contradicted the emotion of the song in his performance. But on the other hand, you don't feel the same way when you're singing this song and there are 20,000 people who love you in the room.
To me, though, it's just the inherent problem of rock videos that the mood of the video frequently has nothing to do with the mood you feel when you hear the record. And then it's inalterably changed for you because you see the video going by instead of this mood you had in your mind.
Well, I find myself ignoring video more and more
right, okay.
and having this problem less and less.
The signal characteristic of this sort of defeatist homo mob is that they're very well educated. And yet, they have this need to see things in these very extreme terms, and the human dimension and the muddled and tainted dimension. You know, it's as if things can exist untainted. And, you know, really, they can't. You know, the Replacements can't. You know, the Clash couldn't. I'm trying to think of other things that really tried to be untainted. Bruce couldn't. You know, everybody walks around, you know, with some part of both things. You know, that's the worst people you could think of are tainted by stuff that's great.
It seems like your own feelings about disco at the time were kind of complicated.
My feelings about everything at all times are supposed to be complicated. That's the job. Here's what happened. I wrote a piece about some of the R&B vocal groups that had been desperately trying to make Archie Bell and the Drums.
Archie Bell piece, right? Yeah.
And Vince Aletti wrote a brilliant rejoinder to it in The Voice, which totally changed my mind about what was going on. And really, I think I may have called Vince and apologized. And I remember doing something like that. Then I think the other thing was, it's in my book, The Heart of Rock and Soul, went to Yankee Stadium before opening day. It must have been 78. Maybe it was 78 or 79. Mm-hmm. The year of the Reggie Bar, I think it was.
Right.
And Reggie Jackson's doing batting practice. And he's hitting ball after ball. Hang on one second, I gotta get my dog in.
Yep.
Come on, dog. No. Annie? Come on. He's hitting ball after ball into the right field stands. And while this is happening, the record that's playing at full volume over the Yankee Stadium loudspeakers is Disco Inferno.
Right.
Well, you know, I argue with lots of things, but I do not argue with my ears. You know, and when you hear disco music is a music that it's like house is like that, and some of the techno and stuff that's derived from techno are like that. Is like you have to hear it in the right context or you can't get it. You know, I remember Arthur Baker being astonished because I'm not a club goer, and I liked the first house records that he played for me. And I liked them because I understood the ostinato piano figures as being basically a kind of sped-up version of Chicago blues, which they are, right? But that was a fluke. In general, you're going to have an experience that snaps you out of your context and into the context of that music. I can hear free jazz fairly easily, not to say that I understand it or write about it well, but I can hear it, take pleasure in it, and have some concept of what's going on because of all those Sun Ra MC5 shows. It's as simple as that.
Right.
I have been in that world long enough to know, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's truer than other times. You know, it's like early reggae, you didn't need that, or at least I didn't, because you could rely on some parts of your R&B thing to get you through. You know, dancehall, you're going to have to work harder. It's as simple as that.
You're saying in Rock and Roll Confidential, and with the kind of writing that you're doing, that rock should be viewed as politically as any other aspect of labor or work in manufacturing.
I don't understand how anybody could ever look at anything that comes out of, first of all, I don't see how you can look at anything in a completely apolitical fashion. I mean, that's what my politics are, is that everything is political. For better, I mean, that can make your life, that can make ordering dinner a complicated matter sometimes. And you got to know where to draw a certain line just in order to get through the day. On the other hand, to draw that line, again, you come back to this entertainment bugaboo. To draw it at rock and roll is really stupid, because rock and roll came out of an incredible racial and social controversy. I mean, it's no accident that Elvis Presley popped up less than 6 months after Brown versus Board of Education. Alan Freed got famous as a disc jockey for playing black records to white listeners and getting people upset over his race mixing. That's what rock and roll is all about, folks.
We're back with Dave Marsh. Let's do some very quick takes here. Why don't critics generally like Billy Joel?
Well, speaking for myself, I think it's because Billy he's pretty stiff, I mean, this We Didn't Start the Fire is like a rap record without any of the groove. And I think it's also, he's perceived as a little stuffy, musically and lyrically.
But, a little stuffy, okay, even if we grant that, does that lead logically to the kind of vilification that he receives? Isn't the real crime that this guy committed is that, in addition to being a little stuffy, if we're gonna take that as a given, he's too successful? He's a real successful guy who isn't exactly what the critics like. And that's the biggest crime. If he was just like moderately successful, then he would be reviewed sort of in the middle. But now he gets vilified because he's just too damn successful for somebody who does this stuff.
Wait a minute. You must be talking to some other rock critic. I'm the one who gets beat up for liking Bruce Springsteen because he's too successful. So that certainly isn't my criterion for having trouble with Billy Joel, who incidentally is someone who I know a little bit and like immensely, who I think is a terrific person. But I have problems with his music.
Now, are you happy to take credit for coining the phrase punk rock?
Well, happier every year. And I may as it's funny because a bunch of different people, even Bob Costas, called me up and said, well, Legs McNeil says in his book that he coined the term. And I said, well, he didn't. This is when it happened.
It's in your Rudy Martinez.
In my question mark in the Mysterians
yeah.
Looney Tunes column, and it does, and Legs McNeil was still, learning how to lift his tone arm at that point, and that's just true. Now, he has some need, I guess, to write me out of the story. I mean, hey, being able to write that much oral history about the MC5 and Detroit and not mention my name, that takes a very skillful and dishonest person.
Yeah.
And what was impressive to me about it was the skill, because I already was aware of the dishonesty.
Right. Okay.
What happens, of course, is that you rebel, and then you need some way to reconcile yourself to whatever new world you're trying to create. And after the Clash broke up for a while, Joe Strummer, who's their lead singer, got back together, and he made this record, This Is England, which is probably my favorite Clash record, because it gets both sides. It's an angry, angry attack on Margaret Thatcher in a metaphoric way, but not too metaphoric. It's clear enough. And at the same time, it's an enormously sad piece of music. It's people in England hate it for some reason because they don't feel like it really gets the spirit of struggle strongly enough. But I thought it got the spirit of exhaustion that people feel in the midst of fighting as they see their social welfare system dismantled and everything. And there he is.
The Clash. This is England.
And you have been a career-long champion of Orbison. But is it fair to say that while it was close to universal before Roy's death, now it's totally universal? If I had pulled out a Roy Orbison record in 1971 in the dormitory at Syracuse University, and lifted my roommate's Black Sabbath record off the turntable and put Roy Orbison singing Only the Lonely or In Dreams on that turntable,
I would have come in from the hall and saved your life.
But you would have had to. You would have had to. And all of these self-satisfied, alleged sophisticates would have told you that it was Costas who was crazy, and the other guy who had the taste that was, closer to where you should be.
I heard it. I heard it. And I think that, I don't think that until the movie Blue Velvet came out, I don't think that there were probably more than a couple of rock critics who really understood what Roy was. And what Roy was not only the most brilliant white male voice of the 50s and 60s, which he certainly was, had a voice to rival, I think, of maybe only Jackie Wilson, amongst all singers at that period, Lou Willie John, people like Patty. But his lyrics have a psychological basis. They're almost like perfect Jungian parables.
Do I think that the revolution in white rock and roll, or in a part of white rock and roll, that happened in England and was stillborn in the United States with punk, approaches the significance of the rise of rap music? That's a silly idea.
Okay.
It seems to be the idea that has animated much of rock criticism for the last 20 years, but it's an absurd idea. I mean, it's just ludicrous.
Okay.
Bill in Michigan.
Hey, how you doing?
All right.
I'm driving along here in Michigan. I'm listening to you guys. I really haven't listened to you before. And you guys were talking about the system preying on people, but I really didn't understand what you were talking about. I didn't really know what you meant. I assume you guys love the capitalist system that provides so many products and services for the masses.
I hate it.
You do? You think the government should control everything?
No, I think that if you're going to say something like that, I think you should shut up until I tell you what I do think, because I'm not a Patriot Channel puppet. I'm a real person, just like you. So don't you put words in my mouth. Don't you start that.
I asked you a question.
Don't you start. No, you did not ask me a question.
I said I assume. And
you did not ask it as a question.
Oh, yes,
Shut up.
Oh, but I did, sir.
Okay, then, sir, either you're going to shut up and I'm going to answer your phony question, or we're just going to end it. What do you want, Bill?
I'd like you to answer my question.
Then shut up.
That's very rude.
You can't do it. You can't. Yeah, I'm rude. I am rude. I'm rude to people who come over here from a right-wing channel and waste my time and waste the audience's time. You don't belong here. Now have some manners or get lost.
I'm a left-winger. I'm not right.
You're a left-winger. Kiss my ass. No left-wingers are capitalists. You're a liar is what you are. All right. We'll get to the other. We'll get to the... why do these people even bother? I don't need that. You're a right-wing guy. You got 4 channels or something like that on this goddamn system. Go away. Go away from my show. I'm going to be rude to you. I am. I don't want you here. If you're a left-wing person you disagree with, then we can have an honest disagreement. You guys don't know how to be honest because you're full of talking points that were fed to you by the pigs who work for Sirius and the pigs who don't on those right-wing channels. So don't you come over here and think that I'm fodder for your wit. I'm a left-wing guy who starts off by saying, I assume you're in favor of capitalism, which means he knows that he has reason to believe that I'm not. What an idiot. Or else it means that he doesn't know anything about capitalism, in which case he's still an idiot. We're here to talk about how to make some progress towards a new society. And quite honestly, we ought to be able to do it nonviolently, but I don't imagine myself that we're going to be able to do it by being polite to everybody. You know? I just don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong. You're welcome to set me straight. We're at 866-99-SIRIUS, 866-997-4748. We will be here till 4. We're going to take a break and go to the news. Then we're going to be back with the record of the week, and then we will be talking to you at 866-99-SIRIUS, 866-997-4748. If you're already on the line, hold on, and we'll get to you after the song.
And it was at a time, I grew up in Pontiac, Michigan. It was a time when the city was being integrated racially. And there was a massive controversy in the city about this. And my parents were on the, sheet and burning cross, wrong side of it, from my point of view today. And I heard this record, and I realized, well, this record is a black person singing. And there is no way that in any way this person is any way inferior to me. Something's wrong. I have got to go look into this.
One of his current projects is an 8-page newsletter published out of his living room, which is called Rock and Roll Confidential, and in it you could read a lot of the kinds of stories and information that music magazines aren't apt to publish. And Dave, why did you start doing Rock and Roll Confidential? You've had like all the successful journalist positions in nearly all of the rock magazines. Why do a mimeographed 8-page newsletter from your living room?
I think that's why. I think you reach a certain point where you have acquired a certain responsibility. You've acquired an audience. You've seen what happens to performers and journalists who don't take that responsibility seriously. And it's just time to make a move. I also felt that the political climate and the economic climate in the United States, as it pertained to a lot of people I care about, was desperate, and it was time for somebody to try to reconnect popular culture, particularly musical culture, to political and social thought and activity.
To what extent can you do that in the rock press? And how much do the advertisers in the rock magazines determine what can and can't be said?
Well, I think the question is, to what extent can you do it in any part of the press? I think the rock press is probably a little more frivolous because it's dealing with a little more frivolous subject. But when you see people printing, unmitigated nonsense from Korean Airlines about what really happened over there, it's not any worse than seeing, or certainly not any shallower or flimsier than seeing somebody print unmitigated nonsense about David Bowie. In fact, it might be a little better to do it about David Bowie. So I think it's the same problem, and I think that advertising, and the whole concept of corporate involvement is ultimately one of the major reasons why that problem exists. If you go too far with your critique, then you're into a situation of like, well, then why would you want to try to be selling people a can of Pepsi? Or why would Pepsi want to help you out? And the reality is that Pepsi isn't going to want to, Warner Brothers Records isn't going to want to, CBS News isn't going to want to, neither is anybody else. So you come to a point where you simply say, okay, well, I'll do this another way. I don't need you. And in fact, you would be an active hindrance to what I'd like to accomplish.
Sometimes trash is trash. This is hard for some of the people who have discovered that trash is sometimes art to get around on.
Right.
It's like, okay, you've learned to hit the curveball, now we're going to throw you the slider.
Right.
So
this is interesting. You connect Brown versus Board of Education, famous case for the non-segregation of schools, and the emergence of rock. You see a connection.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, look, the society needed to end segregation for a variety of purposes, and of course because it was right, and a smart guy like Sam Phillips in Memphis, who was
Who
a
was
very
Sam
smart
Phillips?
guy, who was Elvis's record producer and
Right.
record label owner, and who's the guy who said, if I could find a white man with a Negro sound and a Negro feel, I can make $1 billion. He knew that things were changing, and he knew that there was even a marketing advantage to him in that. And he also wanted to bring some barriers down. Sam's a very liberal Southerner and wanted to help bring those barriers down and to use the music to do it.
You may have partly answered this question already, but what I was going to say in regards to the punk that did emerge, obviously, in the late 70s, you were a little more skeptical about it, it seemed, than many of your contemporaries at the time.
I don't like movements in music and the arts. I don't trust them very much. I like social movements. And what punk was in the United States as a social movement was not clear to me, and the parts of it that were clear to me, I didn't like from the get. From the get, I was where Lester wound up in the white noise supremacists. Right? I always saw that. Right? And part of how I saw it was that's how I heard it. And by that I mean the drumming and the bass lines, with the exception of the Clash bass lines, which are very, very good. And some of the Sex Pistols are. But for the most part in that music, the rhythm is atrophied. That wasn't very interesting to me. And
let's go out with what might be the latest Louie Louie recording by Iggy Pop. He's got it on his new album.
Well, it's one of my favorite versions that anybody ever did, and not only because Iggy's an old friend who did the only version I've ever heard on a record called Metallic KO of the dirtiest version of the Dirty Words, but also because what he essentially does on his record is what I try to do in the book, which is show why Louie Louie really does symbolize the end of civilization. He basically is talking about how he looks at CNN, he looks at this and that, finds himself appalled by the world, and his response is, it makes me want to sing Louie Louie.
The interesting question is, what can you do about